So shall we get to our first guest, who is sat right here next to me, Liz Nicholl. She's something of a pioneer, I'd say. I don't use pioneer. I'm going to use that word. Pioneer for women in the sports industry, having held one of the most high-profile jobs in sports in the UK, and you're now the leader of an international sports governing body. You're going to be sharing your career journey with us this morning and just your thoughts on the industry and where it's going at the moment. Of course, you were former chief exec of UK Sport, and here you are now as the president of the International Netball Federation. It's Liz Nicholl. I would ask for a round of applause from my studio audience, but they've been told to be very quiet. So just have it in your head there. Liz, thank you so much for being able to join us here this morning. And being elected as the president of the International Netball Federation, it just gets higher and higher and higher, doesn't it? You don't think you could get any bigger than CEO of UK Sport, and here you are now, president of a global federation.
Yeah, and I'm delighted to take on that role. I was elected to the position just prior to the Netball World Cup in Liverpool last year in July, and of course it's the sport that gave me so many opportunities as a youngster. It's a sport that gave me leadership opportunities, and I would not have had the career that I'd had if it hadn't been for netball. So when I get a phone call from one of the nations around the world that says, would you think about standing for that role, I thought it's the right thing to do, and it's time to give back to the sport that made me.
And that's exactly it. You've pretty much gone full circle. You know, you're a Welsh international rugby player? Netball player. Rugby in a minute. Netball player. And here you are now, you know, president of that. And that must be something that really, really inspires you.
It's fantastic, and I've loved it. I mean, I've been in that post for 6 months now, so it's still early days. And what I see is a hugely passionate volunteer workforce, and a sport on the rise. You know, record sales in Liverpool at the World Cup recently, a growing number of countries that are playing the game now. You know, about 20 million young women and girls that are actually still playing and engaged with the sport. So it's a sport on the rise, and it's something that's really worth doing. It's an organisation that's actually short on financial resource, so it can't actually move things as quickly as it might otherwise do. You can actually employ someone to do a job when something needs to be done. It's a small workforce compared to what I had at UK Sport, team of 6 as opposed to a team of 120 at UK Sport. But it's a delight to actually have that responsibility.
And on that, when we look at UK Sport versus what you're doing now with the International Federation at Netball, this must be a huge shift for you. You know, you just said there, in terms of the workforce you had at UK Sport versus what you have now, what are some of the lessons that you took from your UK Sport days into your new role?
Oh, loads, absolutely loads. I mean, first of all, the role of the president is a chair of an organisation with a very fancy name. And so I learnt a lot from the chairs that I worked with at UK Sport. The standout was Sue Campbell, who was chair, Baroness Sue Campbell. She was chair at UK Sport for 10 years, an amazing leader, had a presence, and she's very supportive of women in the workforce, and then she was followed by Rod Carr, who was very experienced from sailing, who was there for 4 years, and now of course the delightful Dame Catherine Granger, who was a delight to work with for 2 years now, and she will continue in that post, I've no doubt, for some years to come.
And for you, when you think about, again, comparing the two, you were working in an organisation that looked after multi-sports, weren't you?
Yeah.
Versus to one now where you are solely focused on a sport that you love, of course, netball. How different is that for you to be able to now move your thought process away from all the sports to one?
It's really interesting. So the first move away is from being CEO and knowing everything, and actually being the one that actually finds solves problems and solutions and leads, but to the chair, the president, who actually operates at a strategic level, and others are doing the doing. So that was the first big lesson. But secondly, it's not too dissimilar, because of course we've got member bodies, and each of these national federations around the world are like individual sports governing bodies. And they're all very different. And so just as the role at UK Sport was to invest, yes, but it was also to advise, guide, enable, support the role of the International Federation is to advise, guide, enable, support the national federations and to help them grow and help them be as good as they could be. So there are lots of similarities.
You mentioned Baroness Sue Campbell and Dame Catherine Granger in terms of their roles in your particular career. How important is it that you have these women who you can look up to and learn lessons from across all levels of the organisation?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it is important. And going back a little bit, because Baroness Sue Campbell played a really important part in my early career. I first met her when I was an 18-year-old, and I went to Nottingham University, and she was the netball coach of the British University's netball team. Right. So I knew her a long, long time ago, and she was an inspiration then, and she's an inspiration now. And she pointed me in the direction of moving from chemistry to sport, to a degree in sport. I did a degree in chemistry and then a degree in sport. And then she pointed me towards my very first job in sport. Okay. So I remember that, I valued that, and actually that made me much more conscious of the need to do that with other women in the workforce as well, to be encouraging of them. So and what I was really pleased about in the UK sport environment is there was a long period of time, of course, when we had the chair who was a woman, we had the CEO as a woman, and the performance director a woman, and so that shows that it can be done. The barriers sometimes are not. We think they're there, but they're not always there. But of course it depends on the selection process and how that's managed in any organisation.
I love that you said that she moved you from chemistry to sport.
Yeah.
As if to say.
Yeah.
But it's good because she saw your potential. Were there other women in your life that really saw your potential just before you did and then moved you in a direction?
So the very first person was a teacher when I was leaving school in South Wales, and I was going on to university to study chemistry because I could. And she said to me, don't lose touch with Welsh netball. And I listened to that voice. She was a teacher from another school. I listened to that voice and I thought, I think she thinks I could play netball for Wales one day. And that's all she said, but my antennae were up and I heard it. And I went to university and I went back to Wales to netball trials, and I was selected and I did play for Wales and I played in a couple of World Cups. And then there was another point when I was at university when somebody else, which reinforced really what I'd learnt then, an older student said, I think you should stand to be the president of the Hall of Residence that we were in, 160 women in Hall of Residence. I didn't even know what that role was. It's like chairing gatherings of the students who actually will think about what we need to do in the facility. And but I thought, she thinks I could do that, so why not? So I think I was very fortunate that I had these early experiences that gave me more confidence to listen out to words of positive advice. And if you hear something positive from someone you respect, and if they suggest you can do something, if it's someone you respect, you probably can, so go for it. And so that for me, those were two early experiences I had in my younger years that made me go for my first job in inter-university sport, the only paid employee of an organisation. So in effect, I was a CEO. My first job, I was the first paid CEO of England Netball, and so I went straight into leadership roles because of those early encouraging words.
But you must have had some leadership qualities. For people to see something in you, there must have been a personality trait or a characteristic.
I honestly don't know. I don't know what they saw.
They must have seen something.
I don't know what I saw. But I do think that if you are in a if you have experience with it, well, I suppose if I went right back, I'm from a big family. I was number 6 in a family of 7.
Oh gosh!
So I wanted to be better than the 5 before me.
You have to fight your way through.
And my father was a teacher, my mother was a midwife, and I felt a sense of responsibility in the local community. So I suppose I had this sort of, that's probably something they saw in me. But I will always I'll always remember those individuals that along my path have actually just said a few words of encouragement. They probably don't even know that what they said that day made such a difference. But it did.
And for you, that having mentors and the importance of having mentors in your life, where does that place for you?
I think in the early career it's really invaluable.
Yeah.
But as you benefit from it, then I grew in confidence, and as my career progressed, I didn't have to reference anybody else. I felt my inner confidence growing then through the experiences that I'd had. But now I never say no when somebody asks me for some advice. So it's only last week somebody who's involved with netball asked me for some career advice, and sent me a CV, and I had an hour's conversation on the phone. I will always say yes. Okay. And so I think it's important that if you've benefited in the past from these experiences, to be able to give back to others, because it'd be great to see these young women progress faster.
But what I love about your story, Liz, is that you explained that in your formative years you had this amazing confidence that later on enabled you to go out there and put yourself in positions that made you maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable. You operate within a very male-dominated industry. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've had to come across?
Well, it's really interesting because my first 2 jobs were in women's sport. So for 18 years I was a leader in women's sport. So when I put my hat in the ring for a job at UK Sport, I, for the first time, wondered whether I could do that. I wondered whether I could do it because I was a woman and I was actually moving into a mixed sport environment. I took up 2 other positions as vice chairs of organisations. So I was vice chair Commonwealth Games England. I was vice chair of the Sport Recreation Alliance that is now. But I doubted then I could ever be the chair. So there was that period, which was late 90s, when I doubted I could be the chair of these organisations. A vice chair, yes. And I wondered whether I could work in a male-dominated environment. But actually, as soon as I'd got the job and I was in it, I looked back and thought, why the hell did I even think about that? Why did it even cross my mind? Because I found the colleagues around me were very open, even going in as director of performance. And my first meeting, when all of the performance directors that I had to stand up in front of were all men, I felt a level of respect that gave me confidence to actually spend quite a lot of time asking about what they needed from me and UK Sport, and listening and learning before leading. I think I learnt to listen, to learn, and then lead, and to do things collaboratively.
That's really interesting, and 2 questions come out of that for me. The first one is about the imposter syndrome, because you said for the first time when you went for that role, you had that doubt.
I did have that doubt.
And you'd never had that before.
Yeah.
So what do you think it was in that moment that made you think you could not do that role?
Because I felt that I'd done so well in England netball, and in taking on these other vice chair roles. And I didn't know what it looked like. So it was like stepping into the unknown. But what I learned then is that nobody knows that when you take on a new job, you don't know what you're taking on. You're stepping into, everybody's stepping into the unknown, no matter what that environment is. And so I can't explain it. I can't explain it. But it didn't take me too long to think I shouldn't have thought that. Because I was lucky. Now, not every environment is like the environment I stepped into, perhaps, and others will experience different things. But I suppose because I'd been a leader, I felt a level of, and I'd been a leader in sport, and I felt a level of confidence that I was coming into a strategic organisation with experience of what the customer needed. So again, I had this inner confidence and belief. But I think what I've learnt on the way through my journey through UK Sport is that it is important to still have your antennae up for the positive things, because all too often I've seen young women have their antennae up for the negative things, and it's almost like having it on too loud. The things you don't quite do as right as you might have done. and you forget all the great things you've done. So I sort of employed a tactic that I would always on a Friday reflect on my week past for several reasons. One is, am I doing the right things? And another would be, if there were as a different perspective on decisions I'd made, if I replayed it, would I make that same decision again? And if I was confident enough I'd make that same decision again, given all the information, then actually I was able to move on and appreciate the successes, and not be held back by doubters or naysayers. So I do think it's important to have these little tactics that you can reflect. I think reflecting, because most people are doing a lot of hugely good stuff. Yeah. And it's only often those smaller things that go wrong that you remember most.
So it's a Friday. So Friday thoughts. Courtesy of Liz. Take your time, reflect, feel good about yourself. Feel Good Friday. That's what we're going to call it.
Feel Good Friday. I think it's fantastic. Feel Good Friday.
Feel Good Friday. And what was really interesting about your story as well is walking into that boardroom, standing up in front of all those men and just saying what you needed to say and feeling like you earned the respect, not feeling intimidated. And how important is it actually that men are our allies in this industry?
I think it's absolutely critical. Do you know, I was so a couple of weeks ago I was drawn, a colleague in Australia, Netball, drew my attention to an initiative in Australia that I'd not heard of, and I won't get the title of it right, but it's men championing diversity. Right. It's men in industry, and the reason I know about it is that the woman who was in touch from Netball Australia was a mentor, an advisor to this group of men who were big hitters in industry, and they were committed to accelerating the diversity agenda, and they were positioning it as something which is of national significance, international significance, and has economic importance as well. And I thought this was incredibly powerful. So I think that I think the role of men in actually supporting diversity is as important as the role of women.
And you say that they were really open-minded. They helped you to be able to do that. Are you seeing more and more of that as time goes on, that's actually changing and the mindset is changing, that women can absolutely be right at the top of their game in the industry?
I think the world is changing slowly. What I gave you an example of is something I haven't seen anywhere else. Okay. I don't know whether it's happening here. It might be. Yeah. But I think things are changing. I do think that some of the initiatives that have been put in place, for example, with getting more women on boards, has been a key part of the changes that are happening.
And you did that at UK Sport, didn't you? Created the Code for Sports Governance.
Well, both UK Sport and Sport England worked together on that, because we were both funding a significant number of sports organisations, and this is where you use the power of the lever of the funding to make significant, important things happen.
Could you just give a bit of context, actually? What was the Code for Sports Governance, and why was it important that you really drove that initiative forward?
Well, I'd have to give credit to the colleagues in my colleagues in UK Sport and Sport England, who worked incredibly well over probably a year in developing this code. And it is just like in any industry, you'll say, what does good look like in our world? Mm-hmm. In the world of leadership and governance is fundamental to the success of any organisation. So, any organisation that wants to achieve really needs to look very carefully at its leadership and its governance. And governance is about structure, it's about people, predominantly. There are other factors as well. But what the code was a set of requirements that explained what governance is, what good governance looks like, and why good governance is important. And there was a strand within that, of course, which was about diversity. Yes. And the diversity, that particular strand, there were about 67 requirements in this code that if the sports needed to comply with to receive public funding. But the diversity on boards angle was really about acknowledging that if you have a diverse board, you have diversity of thought, and you're going to make better decisions. And it was a nonsense that, in fact, many of the organisations where the customers were both male and female had male-dominated boards. So targets were set, and they're both Sporting England and UK Sport monitor those regularly, and progress is being made.
I was going to say, by the time you left, were you in a happy place with that particular code?
Oh, with the code, absolutely.
It
was, I thought, why on earth didn't we think about this 10 years ago? It's an amazing tool to provoke change. The one regret I have about the women's agenda in my time at UK Sport is that we didn't crack women in high performance coaching. We did not crack that one. I had a couple of meetings with women in the high performance industry to hear from them about what were the blockers to them progressing. So I knew what the blockers were, but we didn't get to dealing with them. So the blockers were things like culture. The women wanted a more developmental culture, so less about complete focus on management, and let's have more of a developmental culture. They wanted to see more case studies of women who had actually succeeded in high performance sport. They wanted, not as an athlete, but as leaders and coaches and administrators. They wanted to have networks to connect the women that actually had experiences and had good ones to share as well. They wanted us to have a close look at the recruitment panels for those posts to make sure there was no unconscious bias going on. So there were a number of things that we found out would make this world better. They wanted some flexibility as well, of course, around job share, perhaps, which is a bit more difficult in the performance environment.
And that's challenging, isn't it? Always stepping out of a role and thinking, I could have done that little bit more. But that's the athlete in you, isn't it? I'm sure.
Well, what I know is, in UK Sport now there's a team of people that are, there's a people development team that actually have stepped up in terms of the strategy that will look at, who have we got in this high performance landscape, and how do we recruit, retain, and develop. And so I'm sure there will be strategies in place now to address those things.
Okay, we've had some questions in from you guys that are listening in, watching on your laptops, and we've had this in from Marissa. You're at the top of the UK, so you were at the top of the UK sports industry since the 1980s. What has improved for women? What's needed to break the glass ceiling for equality in top positions? So I'm guessing characteristics or drive or experience. What do you think personally is needed to break through?
I think profile is really important. I think what you're doing now is really important. I think women being willing to give back and network and share their experiences and encourage others. I think it's really important to continue to have diversity targets, and where you have got levers for change, use those levers for change, where you've got formal levers for change. I think it'd be great to engage more men in this, and I, the example I gave of the national, international, and economic benefits, and the diversity of thought that are going to make better decision making. Why wouldn't any business, and the business of sport, want to actually get more women engaged? So I think the more we talk about it, the more platforms there are to discuss it, the more examples that can be shared, the better.
Okay, and I'm going to take you back to student Liz Nicholl, when you were going for the president of, what was it again, the association, students?
Oh no, so it's the whole of just the whole of residence. It's like the building that we lived in.
President's Hall of Residence. I want to take you back to those days, and I want you to give a little bit of advice to yourself, knowing what you know now, all the experience that you've had, and what would you have said to yourself back then?
I would definitely, the top priority would be listen out for words of advice. Yeah. And if those words of advice and positive acknowledgements are coming from someone you respect, then actually listen to them, believe them, and go for things that are beyond your reach. Throughout my career, I went for jobs that I thought were beyond my reach. I didn't think I was a natural fit for them necessarily, but I went for them because I didn't want to don't make the decision of the selection panels for them. put yourself forward.
Okay, love that. Okay, that's Feel Good Fridays with Liz Nicholl. Liz, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Fantastic insights.
You're
I'm
welcome.
sure anyone listening in would have definitely got some advice from you today. Thank you so much.